Hey, it's Roy Newgate and we are back with another new video. And for this one, I wanted to give you guys my list for what I think is the 30 strongest One Piece characters of all time, with the limited information we have for a lot of them. And I won't be including characters like Wang Ji, Captain John, Silver Axe, the type of characters that there isn't enough to make an educated guess or, a range or for where they stand in this list. And for a lot of them, of course, it does come down to making a guess because there just isn't enough to say, oh, character A is stronger than character B. So some of these characters can easily be interchangeable with whoever comes right before them or right after them. It all depends on Oda's vision and where he's taking things for them. So without further ado, let's get right into the list. At number 30, I have what many people might consider the Pirate King's left hand, Scopper Gabin, or Gaban, depending on how you pronounce his name. I'm just going to go with Gabin. Now, Scopper is one of the trickiest on this list because, his power can be in a very wide range. And, the thing is, some people might want to compare him to Rayleigh and say he's as powerful as Rayleigh and kind of eat off of Rayleigh's hype and apply that to Scopper on a slightly lower level. But I just don't see it like that. If that was the case, I'd have them within the same range, maybe even within 3 or 4 spots of each other. But the thing for me is, I don't think Scopper really has that presence that Rayleigh has. He doesn't have that Dark King presence. He, Rayleigh has so much going for him, But I don't want to speak too much on Rayleigh. I'll do all the talking about him when we get to him on the list. But as far as Scopper goes, I feel like if there was anything in the story that, boosted his portrayal, something as simple as people calling him the Copper King, people being in awe whenever his name is mentioned, anything like that, that would make him look a lot better. The fact that he's a top 3 Roger pirate, though, is enough for me to put him on this list and feel like, it's ensured him a spot in the top 30. So at number 29, we have the Flame Emperor, Sabo. And for Sabo, I feel like he has a lot of potential in the coming chapters, or in this arc, the final saga. And the reason he's not higher for me right now is because I don't think we have enough from the fight against the admirals, the revolutionaries and the admirals, to know how high he can stand right now, especially because it wasn't a one-on-one fight, and the fact that they didn't, physically defeat the admirals or anything like that. They completed their objective, but it wasn't a definitive W, in terms of power scaling anyway, because as far as their objective goes, of course, that's a definitive W, but it didn't tell us anything about Sabo's power. As far as his reputation goes, we know that's growing by the day, some people say he's even more renowned than Dragon at this point. So obviously that kind of stuff implies that his potential, at least, is very high. I'm just not ready to put him higher until we have, something more definitive to go off of for his combat ability, because I'm not sure where the series is leading for him. I'm not sure if he's gonna somehow be the leader of the Revolutionary Army after Dragon, or something else. As soon as we have a goal or a ceiling for him specifically, I'll reevaluate my thoughts for him. At 28, I have the Surgeon of Death, Trafalgar Law. And Law, as we know him right now, is a 3 billion berry pirate. Now, with Law, he has some room to grow, but as he is right now, the question is he strong enough to give a Yonko or Admiral a top tier, a high difficulty fight? I'm not sure, but he should be somewhere within that range, and he should be inching closer to the point where he should be able to defeat one-on-one on his own. At 27, we have Eustace Captain Kidd, and with him, it's pretty much the same story. Him and Law have that side-by-side portrayal where they're both 3 billion berry bounty pirates who defeated Big Mom. They share the credit for her, and they have a similar ceiling. I may have Kidd ahead, but I feel like Law is right at his hip. He's not lagging far behind by any measure, and by the end of the series, we'll see if Oda gives us the means to say that these guys are top 10 all time. That's where I think the story is going, but we just have to see it. We just have to see who they defeat, what new abilities they might have, and just what their overall combat ability looks like. At 26, I have Zoro, and with him, it's similar to how I view Kidd and Law. I don't think they can defeat a top tier on their own at the moment, but they're dangerously close to that. And the reason I have Zoro at the top of these 3 is because he's an awakened conqueror. And I went into detail on this in my video explaining who I think the second strongest supernova is behind Luffy. So if you're interested in that, you can go check that out just to get my thoughts on the dynamic between these 3. At 25, I have Weevil. And with Weevil, I feel like this is at the point where we're getting into that whole top tier territory. Weevil might be in the same boat as Zoro, Kidd, and Law. He might not be able to defeat a top tier, but he's right there. he might be able to just take them to a high difficulty fight, or maybe even an extreme difficulty fight, or maybe even win. You know, I'm more confident in Weevil's ability to do this than Zoro, Kid, and Law, because the things we've heard about Weevil, the things they've said about him in the story, it just gives you that feeling that he's just a force to be reckoned with, you know. Similar to Mihawk, he's a solo pirate, so to speak. You know, he has his mom with him, but it's not really a huge factor because he doesn't have a crew and everything. He just goes around wiping out pirates. He slaughtered all those Whitebeard pirates and allies. He laid waste to so many towns and villages, and just, you know, it's just complete destruction in his path. But the biggest thing that stands out the most is the fact that Kizaru said that his strength is comparable to a young Whitebeard. And it's anyone's guess how young or how powerful this version of Whitebeard was, but something we might be able to go off of is the fact that they called the Whitebeard on the Rocks pirates a young Whitebeard when they were talking about him in the Ultimate chapter. So if Weevil was at least as strong as this version of Whitebeard, then that says enough. I feel like this is enough for me to say that Weevil is in the top 25 all-time strongest. At 25, we have Ben Beckman. And I feel like Ben Beckman is one of the most underrated right hands in this series. And that's because people don't recognize who he is exactly and what place he serves in the story. But to me, Ben Beckman is a definitive top tier, and you can make the case for him if you wanted to that he could defeat a handful of them for whatever reason. If you were to ask me how strong I think he is, I'd say he's as strong as an emperor. He might lose to every one of them, but he's on that level, on that tier. I think it said in his Xebec card that even by the powerful opponents of the New World, he has tremendous power and is as feared as Shanks. And you know, I see that people overlook this or try to downplay the significance of this kind of portrayal that's given to us for Ben Beckman in the viewer card. And I can understand why. I can understand why there's some sort of doubt that comes into it, just because it doesn't specifically say that he's as strong as Shanks. But I feel like if you have the opinion that maybe Rayleigh and Roger were on a similar tier or they were close, I feel like that has to apply to Beckman and Shanks, because the way Roger, Shanks, and Luffy mirror each other is the same way Rayleigh, Beckman, and Zoro are all sort of mirrors each other, you know, for each generation, each era. All three crews are structured the same way, and these three guys have a similar relationship with their captains. Now, Zoro might be significantly behind Luffy at the moment, but by the end of the series, once he becomes the world's strongest swordsman, he'll be on that Yonko tier. He'll be, you know, at a level where he can defeat an emperor, the same way I think Ben Beckman might be able to, and Rayleigh as well by extension. At 23, I have the Admiral Green Bull, or as we now know him, Aramaki, or, you know, I guess his actual name or alias, which would be Real Killgill or whatever. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but, you know, everybody would rather go with Green Bull, and I much prefer Green Bull as well, so that's what we're going to go with. Anyway, the thing with Green Bull is I feel like a lot of people in the community downplay him a lot because of his encounter with Shanks, when there's a lot of context that goes into that that's just overlooked. You know, I guess the biggest thing with One Piece fans is they're visual learners, and it's a lot easier to judge with what you see rather than what you know. And I guess that's just human nature at that point. But regardless, I feel like Green Bull is kind of, you know, downplayed to the point where it just doesn't make any sense. Sure, of course, Shanks did something really impressive to him, you know, but that one moment doesn't take away from the fact that Green Bull is a Marine Admiral, and we have yet to see his full abilities. And Oda has gone out of his way to drill home this whole idea that the Admirals are the Navy's strongest fighting force, and they stand side by side next to the Emperors as one of the biggest obstacles on the way to becoming Pirate King. You know, I see some people even saying Green Bull is weaker than perhaps King or Katakuri. And honestly, we have to move on from that. You know, the first commanders are a thing of the past. They've already been defeated. We're moving on to antagonists of the final saga, and the admirals are part of that. You might say, oh, I have Beckman over Green Bull on this list, but the thing is, I don't consider Beckman the first commander. I consider him a vice captain, comparable to his own captain to some extent. I don't think Katakuri, King, and Shiryu are comparable to their captains. That's why I wouldn't put them on this level. Shiryu specifically is more than likely Zoro's next opponent, but you won't find him on this list. And I'll talk more about that in a separate video and what I think that fight offers Zoro. But for where we're at right now, the bottom line is,
no matter how you slice it, the admirals, they need to be respected.
At 22, we have Fujitora, who of course is also a new admiral alongside Green Bull. And the stipulation with this is that people thought that the newer admirals were on a lower tier than the old admirals, and I never subscribed to that because an admiral is an admiral, you know. There's no plot narrative that would benefit the story with the new admirals being weaker, because they're the current challenge to the main characters. They're the current obstacle that lies ahead. So Oda will want to make them as strong as possible and wouldn't want to make them weaker, because then it wouldn't be as, you know, rewarding for them to be defeated. And if you look at Fujitora specifically and you look at the merits of his own abilities, he has one of the most powerful devil fruits in the series. You know, this man is able to summon meteors casually. And this is just a taste of his full power, because we haven't even seen what his awakening can do or what else he might have in the bag. We may not have seen his full power yet, but I think I've seen enough and I know enough to think he deserves a spot in the top 22 of all time. At 21, I have Kizaru. And the reason I have Kizaru over Green Bull and Fujitora is because I believe he'll be Zoro's opponent during the final war. If Luffy is to fight Akainu, Zoro would of course naturally fight the second strongest, and I feel like Kizaru and Akainu have that captain and vice captain relationship. You know, they're always discussing plans and shown together and everything. On top of that, Kizaru always has these moments where he clashes or he fights the right hand of a top tier pirate. There's Marco, there's a scene with Beckman, there's Rayleigh, and even Zoro has a little bit of history with him. So I think there's a lot here to easily connect the dots on why this fight might happen, and why Kizaru is the second strongest admiral behind Akainu if Luffy is to fight Akainu. Now at 20, I have Aokiji, and I don't think Aokiji has to be weaker than Kizaru necessarily, because he's no longer a marine admiral. But I'll give Aokiji the credit because he went extreme diff with Akainu. He fought him evenly for 10 days, and you know, some may say he had the chance to defeat him. Ultimately, he lost out on the Battle of Wills. Now, if you had Kizaru over Aokiji, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it makes sense, especially if you want to factor in the fact that he lost a limb, and I'm not sure if that plays into his power right now, but it might, who knows. Currently though, I think Aokiji should be at the 20th spot of the all-time strongest characters. At 19, I have the former emperor Big Mom, and I'm not talking about the Big Mom that lost the kid in law. I'm talking about what I consider to be prime Big Mom, because I don't think she was at her prime at 68. But I'm also not referring to Big Mom in her late 20s when she was on the Rocks Pirates, because Sengoku confirmed that Big Mom was far stronger. Big Mom and Kaido actually were far stronger than they were back then, but I still don't think that was Big Mom's peak at the time of Sengoku making that statement. Maybe it was somewhere in her 40s, mid 30s, late 30s, I don't know. But I think when she was slimmer, faster, younger, that's when she was in her prime. The reason I say all of this is because I feel like Kaido has made these statements in reference to her age and how it might have slowed her down. And it wasn't direct, but I think it was enough for me to say that, you know, Big Mom might have been more capable a little bit into the past. And even Perospero said he hasn't seen her move, you know, that well, or he hasn't seen her be that nimble in years. And I think that's just to say that Big Mom was different back then. And this is a Big Mom I think deserves 19 on the all-time strongest list. Now, if you ask me about Big Mom at 68, I think she might lose to Kizaru. Now, you may not see it. You may not see the drop in power because she's still extremely powerful, but I think there's just enough for Kizaru to defeat her at that point in her life. At 18, I have Oden, and I feel with Oden, he's another one of those characters that is kind of not given enough respect, and that might be because his opponent was a younger version of Kaido. And Kaido, even 20 years later, puts so much respect on this man that he compares him to Shanks, Xebec, Roger, and Whitebeard. And Oden himself was so renowned for his strength that even Whitebeard himself couldn't believe that another man defeated Kozuki Oden. Of course, Whitebeard didn't have the full context, but the fact that Oden lost alone was alarming to him. Now, some may say that Oden himself wasn't even his prime by the time he fought Kaido. I don't believe so. I believe that Oden has reached his prime already, and he was at his absolute peak. I believe Oden learned enough from his voyages with Roger and Whitebeard to grow to the point that even to this day, Kaido still respects him. And even the narrator alluded to it. He said that Oden grew many times stronger than when he left, and he was already plenty powerful at the point that he left Wano to go out and travel. And so I think Oden at the time of his death was strong enough to be 18 on the all-time strongest list. At 17, I have Kaido. And I feel like people have different opinions on Kaido's power. Some may say he was as strong as he is now back when he fought Oden, and he just didn't have hybrid because of the plot, or rather he didn't show hybrid because of the plot. and, you know, things of that nature. Regardless of whether he had that ability or not, I think he grew stronger in the 20 years that have passed. One of the reasons being the fact that Oden told him to build his strength while he can. So in those 20 years, I feel like he improved his own ability. He improved his haki. He took lessons from nearly losing to Oden and improved himself to the point that he boasts a claim that no one in the world can defeat him. And of course, ultimately Luffy defeated him, but along the way we saw how many things he learned, you know, how deep his bag was. He had future sight, he had Conqueror's coding, he had hybrid, he had a dragon form with a multitude of abilities far beyond anything we would have imagined the first time we saw it. And that's why I think the Kaido that Luffy defeated surpassed Oden and was far stronger than he was in 20 years past. That's why I believe he's 17 on the all-time strongest list. Now, you might say this is low, given who Kaido is, but I think the people ahead of him have their own cases to be made. And truth be told, Kaido could be higher depending on a lot of different factors. I don't think there's anything wrong with putting Kaido higher. Of course, there's certain characters I think have to be stronger than Kaido at this point in the story, but generally speaking, Kaido can be higher on the list. But right now, I'm completely comfortable with him at 17. At number 16, I have the person who defeated Kaido, and that's Luffy. And, you know, I feel like, just like with Katakuri, people try to discredit Luffy for defeating Kaido because Kaido faced other opponents. And then you have people saying it wasn't a true one-on-one, Kaido suffered more damage, all of that stuff. I don't agree at all. I think that's completely nonsense. I think when it came down to the final battle, it was Luffy versus Kaido, one-on-one, uninterrupted, and Luffy took the dub. Luffy came to Onigashima to surpass Kaido and Big Mom, and he did that. This isn't some save for later stuff where he's in Elbaf or in the final war and he realizes, oh, I finally have the power now to be stronger than Kaido. In fact, I don't think it's taken into account enough the fact that Luffy was actually in worse health than Kaido at the moment of their final battle. You know, he was fading in and out of Gear 5 and he was nearly at his limit. At some point he was struggling to stand, and Kaido was saying that he was you know, even dying at that point. So you take all of this into account and I don't see how it makes any sense to not have Luffy stronger than Kaido. At 15, I have Blackbeard, and this is because, of course, Blackbeard is one of Luffy's next opponents, because I definitely don't think Blackbeard has done anything as impressive as Luffy currently, but the narrative takes precedence, and as a result, Blackbeard should be stronger than Luffy before he fights him. And there's a lot of things to consider because, you know, there's the possibility that Blackbeard might have Conqueror's coding and that might play into the fight as well. And there's also the possibility that Blackbeard might acquire a third devil fruit and that may be necessary for him to reach his peak. And for this list specifically, I'm considering that version of Blackbeard. Whatever Blackbeard needs to be at his prime power, that's who I have at 15 on this all-time strongest list. At 14, I have the Revolutionary Army leader, Monkey D. Dragon, the father of the main character. And, you know, one character who I believe that has been probably in the past one of the most respected because, you know, they take into account who he is, the father of the main character, the son of the Marine hero and rival to the Pirate King, and the leader of the one faction that's taking on the world government directly. In recent years, though, I guess some people think that Dragon has become overrated because he hasn't done anything. You know, he's just sitting behind a desk, panicking, wondering what's going on, and that's made people start to doubt his power. But of course, Oda can't dedicate all his time to making all his characters shine all at once, so Dragon's time will come. Look at even what Ivankov said about how it's not ideal to draw both Whitebeard and Dragon's Wrath. This might not be exactly saying he's strong as Whitebeard, but it's implying that when it comes to pure threat level, he's not far off, or he might be right there. And the way I see it, he's within that range to be in the top 14 strongest of all time. Maybe even a spot or two higher or lower, but I think he's definitely deserving of number 14. At 13, I have the former fleet admiral and the current chief of staff of the world government, Kong. Now with Kong, he's one of those where the information on him and his ability is so limited, where it's close to nothing. And the only reason I have him here is because he was a fleet admiral. And for him to be a fleet admiral, he would have to be at least as strong or around the range of a prime Garp and Sengoku. More than likely, Garp and Sengoku ultimately surpassed him, but I still think he's within that level because he was the fleet admiral and now he's in a position even higher than that. The only thing that bothers me is that there's been so many opportunities to give him some portrayal points, but Oda just hasn't done it. And I have no idea why, but it does annoy me quite a bit. Like, why wasn't this guy at Guard Valley? Why was the Vice Admiral Garp the person who was there defending the Celestial Dragons alongside Roger? And mind you, Garp is someone who hates celestial dragons. Kong, on the other hand, is taking promotion after promotion, working closer and closer for the celestial dragons. So it just doesn't make any sense to me why he wouldn't be there, or why he wouldn't even be mentioned. Why is Roger always talking about bring me Garp or Sengoku? Why is it always, oh, Garp and Sengoku fought against Roger and Whitebeard? Something as simple as that will really emphasize the threat that Kong poses. And not even just against Roger and Whitebeard, even in the past, even in the years before Roger's era. I always say that things like this take time because of where we're at in the story. But this in particular just doesn't make sense to me because there's been opportunities to throw it in there that simply have not been capitalized on. That's not to say that I doubt his ability. I just think that Oda could do more to show it. And now at number 12, I have the Golden Lion, Shiki. And with Shiki, he's one of those guys that ruled the seas with Whitebeard and Roger long before the Great Pirate era. And I think there's some sources that even imply that Shiki was on the same level as Roger. I'm not sure if it was a data book or the volume information for Strong World and Chapter 0. Regardless though, I think number 12 all time is very fitting for Shiki. At number 11, I have the current Fleet Admiral, Akainu. And this is because I feel like Akainu down the road will be a very important character, as well as a very important obstacle for Luffy, because he said he'll beat all the emperors and admirals. That doesn't mean he's just going to skip all the admirals. He has to fight at least one of them, and the only one fitting enough is Akainu. Honestly, I might even say that he has more reason to fight Akainu than Blackbeard. Just look at how he reacts to Blackbeard and Akainu in the same chapter. Things with Akainu are a lot more personal, and I think Akainu is strong enough to be just about top 11 all time. At number 10, I have Shanks, who is one of the most highly regarded characters in the series, if not the most highly regarded in terms of power. You know, this guy does not need any defending. People know what he's about. Some even have him as the strongest character ever. And while I think that's ludicrous, I don't blame them because of what Oda has done and how hyped up he's made Shanks, the way he's presented him. Some even call him the Roger of the current era, while Luffy is the Roger of the future era. Now, although I don't see Shanks as his God King as some people do, I think he's strong enough to be top 10 all time. And you know, the thing is, I'm not sure if Luffy will ever face him because it's very possible that Shanks dies to Blackbeard. And another thing with Luffy is he has plot lines with so many opponents and so many antagonists that it's very hard to tell which way Oda's gonna go, which one or which set of them is Oda gonna have face Luffy. You know, he might face Blackbeard, he might face Akainu, he might battle with Shanks, he might face Emu down the road. So it's very hard to take that all in and deduce who is stronger than who and who Luffy will face. But I think we have enough for Shanks to say he's around the 10 spot or around the top 10 all-time strongest. At number 9, I have the Dark King, Silver's Rayleigh. And I know you might question why I have Rayleigh above Shanks, but here's the thing for me. I think Shanks with 2 arms would have been past Rayleigh. I think he would have been stronger. I think that was that would have been his peak potential. And I absolutely do not think that the loss of an arm is inconsequential, because otherwise, why would it be a sacrifice? Why would it mean to give something up if he didn't actually lose anything? The way I see it, Shanks sacrificed his peak potential in order to save Luffy, and that is what he bet on the next era. Now, this isn't to say that Shanks 12 years ago is stronger than Shanks now. Of course he grew within that time, but I think that if he had both arms, he would have grew even more and grew even stronger. But currently, I have current Shanks just under prime Rayleigh. I think he could still take him extreme diff, but I think Rayleigh is experienced enough to the point that that loss of a limb will make a difference in their fight. And it's not a very big difference. It's a very, very tiny difference the way I see it, but it's still enough for it to matter if Shanks were to fight someone like Rayleigh. But now let's talk more about the merits of Rayleigh's ability, because I believe Rayleigh is right there, right within the same tier as Roger. He's definitively weaker, but he's on that tier. That's how I see a prime Rayleigh. This guy was giving a prime admiral issues while he himself was pushing 80. Sure, he wouldn't have won, but he did so much to the point that it makes some people wonder, could a 76-year-old Rayleigh defeat a prime Kizaru? And what exactly is he capable of in his prime to the point that the Navy was so cautious of having to handle both him and Whitebeard at the same time? I think the biggest thing that Oda has given us lately is the fact that Rayleigh himself implied that the reason that he was able to get Blackbeard to leave Amazon Lily alone is because of his reputation. And this is a 4 billion berry man. A 4 billion berry man thought that he would not be able to defeat Rayleigh. That's what was going through Blackbeard's mind. He didn't know the truth though. He didn't know that that Rayleigh had declined to the point that he would suffer a sure defeat if he were to take on Blackbeard at this moment in time. But still though, this gives Rayleigh insane portrayal points, and this is why I think that he's strong enough to be number 9 all time. At number 8, I have the world's strongest swordsman, Dracula Mihawk. In my last video, I went into complete detail and what I think Oda may be setting up for him and how strong he might actually be. He has a lot going for him, you know, his title, his bounty, his feats being one of the only characters ever with the Black Blade, one of only 3 characters that we know with the confirmed Supreme Gray Blade, the other 2 of course being Roger and Whitebeard, also one of only 3 characters with the world's strongest title. So there's so much we could talk about with Mihawk and so much to hype him up and boost him, and still so much that we don't know. But from what we do know about him, I feel like it's enough to put him in the number 8 spot of the all-time strongest. At number 7, I have the Fleet Admiral, or rather the former Fleet Admiral before Akainu, Sengoku. And Sengoku I feel like isn't talked about enough. When Roger said bring me some actual competition, he didn't say just bring Garp, he said Garp and Sengoku. This man is extremely powerful and we haven't really seen much of his prime strength, but I feel like he's strong enough to the point that he would have been able to take down Shiki on his own. If of course Garp had decided not to tag along. And of course if that was the case, it would have been a far more difficult battle. But I still think Sengoku would have came out on top because he was the one entrusted with this assignment. And at number 6, naturally I have Garp himself, the hero of the Marines. And the thing with Garp is most of his reputation is built on propaganda by the world government. And that's of course because they have a bias against pirates and they don't want them taking credit for anything. But even without that, we know that Garp is extremely powerful and a very accomplished individual to the point that pirates such as Roger and Whitebeard respect his ability. Although he can't take sole credit for the defeat of the Rock's pirates, he was still a very important part of their defeat. And even after that, he grew many times more powerful. So it goes without saying that Garp deserves this spot on the all-time strongest list. And if you just look at his family, his son is the leader of the revolutionaries, his grandson is about to be the pirate king. Like, that Monkey D blood goes crazy. Like, these guys are extremely powerful and at the top of each era one way or another. At number 5, I have Rox D. Xebec, who is considered Roger's greatest foe, and I'm not sure if that exactly means his strongest, but he still presented as an obstacle that Roger could not overcome on his own at a certain point in time. And the fact that Rox was the captain of all these future conquerors and great pirates, it holds up his portrayal a lot. I mean, he had Kaido, Big Mom, Whitebeard, Shiki, Wang Ji, Silver Axe, Captain John, so many big names that were led by this one man on the same crew. There's still so much that we don't know about him that Oda is keeping secret that may help us understand better how powerful he might have been at that time. For example, what if he has Conqueror's coding? What if he's a swordsman with a black blade? What if he's one of the previous users of the Yami Yami who awakened the strongest abilities of this devil fruit? From what we know now, I think number 5 is appropriate for him on the all-time list. At number 4, I have the Pirate King Gold D. Roger. And I know this might be confusing for a lot of people because how is the Pirate King not top 2 or top 1 on the all-time list? I'll explain that a little bit as we get further ahead. But as far as Roger versus Xebec goes, I feel like Roger was weaker than Xebec at the time of God Valley, but he eventually surpassed him on the way to becoming the Pirate King and possibly the most revered pirate of all time at that point in time. You know, I don't need to say much about Roger. You know, it goes without saying who this man is. At number 3 though, I have Whitebeard, the world's strongest man. And truth be told, it's really hard, you know, trying to assess the difference in strength or how these two compare to each other when it comes to power. Most things that we have to go off of, it implies that they were equals and that they tied in the fights that they had. We have never been given a clear winner. And at no point in the story has Roger been confirmed to be the strongest pirate in the world or the strongest pirate of all time or anything like that. And this might be purposeful by Oda, or maybe he just thinks the title of Pirate King is enough. I'm not sure exactly. On one hand, we have the fact that Whitebeard's Viva card says that he gained the title of World's Strongest before the Great Pirate Era. And this was marked by Roger's death, so this would imply that Whitebeard was the strongest in the world while Roger was alive, and it's for this reason that I give Whitebeard the edge over Roger on this list. Especially because Roger did not defeat Whitebeard in order to become Pirate King. Roger actually had help from Whitebeard, because if Roger didn't get Oden from Whitebeard, then Roger would have never became Pirate King. So honestly, there's a lot to consider, and until Oda, you know, adds anything else to the conversation, I think it's okay to have Whitebeard over Roger as number 3 all time. At number 2, the second strongest One Piece character of all time is Ryuma, the sword god. And yeah, you probably wouldn't find Ryuma as top 2 on any all-time list, but I think Oda really holds Ryuma's name up in extremely high regard. And I'd say even higher than Roger and Whitebeard, because although they may be the two strongest pirates of all time, Ryuma might be one of the strongest characters of all time. And there's so much that goes into his portrayal, with the fact that his name alone keeps the world government out of Wano and has kept them away for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this man's reputation and portrayal is just staggering. Even far past his death, the samurai were feared strictly because of his name. And honestly, I was tempted to put him as a tie for number one, but then it hit me that there's someone else that Oda holds a bit higher than Ryuma. I was gonna say that maybe Ryuma and this individual were on the same, or perhaps equals in Oda's eyes, but given where the story is going, I think number one is Joy Boy, or the Sun God. Assuming they're the same person, I'm definitely going to assume that for this list. So Joy Boy is number one, and I think it's implied that he was the previous user of the Nika fruit, which at this moment in time is looking like the strongest fruit ever. Normally I would have probably said it's either the Gura Gura or the Ope Ope, but with what Oda's been pushing lately, it's definitely the Nika fruit. Especially with how much fear the Gorosei showed when they found out that Luffy was the owner of the fruit and that he might awaken it. So all of this together is why I believe Joy Boy is the strongest One Piece character of all time. But of course, Luffy will eventually surpass him. Alright, that's my top 30 all-time strongest characters. Let me know what you think though. Also, don't forget to drop your list down below in the comments. Like the video as well, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more videos like this.